done to turn your camera off if you wish, but it's always good if presenters can see a few faces. Just makes it a bit more pleasant when you're not talking to a lot of black screens. I'm delighted to launch this national research in South Australia today in conjunction with Northern Volunteering and on behalf of the National Network of Volunteer Resource Centres. I've been around in volunteer resource centre work for a long time, 24 years to be exact. And honestly, this is truly one of the most thought-provoking pieces of volunteering research that I've ever read. And I'm not just saying that because we took part in it. It truly has challenged a lot of my thinking and a lot of the knowledge that I thought wasn't changeable over the 24 years I've been doing this work. So the research itself was funded federally by the Department of Social Services in 2018 under a programme called the Strong and Resilient Communities Activity. And I guess it was after a group of what you might call renegade volunteer resource centres got together, led by the Centre for Participation in Victoria. I'll just wait. That's a thank you. Who decided to explore how volunteer engagement impacts social cohesion and perhaps how volunteer resource centres could potentially modernise and develop their services. The research has become much more pertinent in the last 12 months as volunteer resource centres locally, the ones like Southern Volunteering, Northern Volunteering, where our main source of funding comes from federal government and it's unknown what's going to happen to that funding beyond June of next year. So we're really thinking about our future. And of course, we've had bushfires and COVID-19, which have impacted the volunteering movement hugely. So today you're going to hear from 4 speakers who have all played a part in the research, with Ross Wyatt from Think Impact taking centre stage to present the findings. So welcome, Ross. After the meeting, we will send everybody the executive summary. We'll send you the full research report, 106 pages of it, and the recording of the meeting today. So if there's any colleagues that you've got that have missed out, you'll be able to share the recording with them. And the documents will be available to download off our websites and on social media. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Donatella Amos, Executive Officer of Northern Volunteering, my work wife, as I call it, partner in crime. And they're going to talk about their involvement in the research as one of the 4 case studies. So over to you, Donatella.
Thanks, Mel. I've just had to welcome Roxanne with us here from the City of Playford, and Roxanne will be taking over from me because the project we're working on, or our part of it, was in partnership. So there's a lot more to talk about. I came into the project, or the group. I had already started before I had this role as executive officer. So halfway through, it was around looking at youth volunteering, youth participation, and the youth, especially here in the north. We've got a particular group of people who struggle in a whole range of areas and lots of complex needs. But there was a real gap when it came to young people, really dedicated, really passionate, really wanting to do something, but just weren't able to be heard. Or they felt they weren't able to be heard, they weren't able to be listened to, they didn't have a role to play, and they just kept getting stuck. And so it was just to break that cycle of you know, we want to help, we want to be doing something, but where do we go from here? So that was the start of it, and the discussion, as I mentioned, happened before I came along. So when I came along, I was very fortunate, and we've got a couple other players here today. So what we looked at was around youth volunteering and youth connection to community and what that all meant, and especially disengaged youth. We talk about disengaged youth, disengaged for a whole range of reasons, because of a whole lot of barriers, or what they saw as barriers, and also what organisations saw as barriers. And I think it's come up over and over again, and many of you here will agree, you know, that we want young people, but they come up with all these sorts of things, and the young people are saying we want to be given a go, and off you go. So that's where I came into it. I think some of the groundwork had already been done with Roxanne and the group, and yeah, did you want to take it from here? We've got a did you want me to share that now? Yeah. We've got a presentation to share here, so I'll just bring that up on the screen, and I'll get out the way. So social distancing, we'll get all that. Okay, so is that, can you see that? It should be a screen saying Reimagining Youth Volunteering Project. Does that come up? Yep, so I'll get to do that.
Okay, beautiful. Sorry, everyone. You'll have to excuse me. I've actually just come from 2 volunteer Christmas parties. So we had one morning tea and one eve at lunchtime. So yeah, feeling a little bit like, oh, where am I going to start? Okay, so I'm just going to use that. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily play this, but I just want to talk about Kimberly. So Kimberly was a young person that came to volunteer at the City of Playford. When Kimberly came, she came with a support worker and was really, really anxious about wanting to volunteer. And so I guess some of the things that we needed to do, and some of the learnings from working with young people such as Kimberly, was really about supporting them through the process, so that when someone new comes on board, not just sort of handing them the forms and, you know, here's your job, and just getting on with it. Because what was happening with Kimberly, and Kimberly shared her story, and it's available on the City of Playford Facebook page, but was, you know, she would really struggle in terms of her anxiety. So even just being able to come into the building and being able to get on with the job. So we were getting lots of calls, you know, I'm not well today, I can't come in. And so we worked really hard with Kimberly to build her confidence. We looked at some of the training that we were doing with her, and, you know, fast forward, we had some amazing outcomes, and she actually, in our volunteer week activity, you know, participated in sharing her story, which was huge for her. But I guess what that kind of made us think about was, you know, what are the opportunities out there? So I guess some of the things that have been happening of recent times is the curriculum of giving, getting a lot more school students. For those people in South Australia, you would know there's a lot of emphasis on schools participating in volunteering and supporting. But what was actually happening is that, you know, the more that the young people were getting really excited and kind of getting their interest about volunteering and wanting to be involved, but then they would come to a volunteer involving organisation and there wouldn't be anything for them to get involved in. The other thing was around the opportunity through Think Impact. NDIS is a really big area. We, just in the month of October at the City of Playford, got about 18 inquiries from people who, as part of their NDIS plan, are wanting to volunteer, or getting calls through through their agency. So, you know, there's supporters. So it's really great, you know, some of the stuff that Volunteering SA are doing with Arana around supporting young people on NDIS. People looking for volunteering as a training employment, and then obviously the things through the volunteer strategy for South Australia. What were some of the challenges? Some of the things that kind of came up in the work that we were doing is around, which I think ties in quite well with some of the stuff that Think Impact have been doing, around volunteering. It's about how do we focus on the outcomes arising from the volunteer activity rather than just the act of volunteering itself. I think that was a really big one. A lot of volunteer involving organisations, we find, because we're very time poor, it's just about, let's get the people in, get them trained, get them doing the job, but we're not necessarily spending that time with them at the beginning to get them ready to be able to do that and do it well and feel supported. Unconscious or conscious bias, particularly around young people. One of the things we pose to people is, you know, think back to your very first job. I know, you know, if I think back to my first job when I was 15, it was scary. It was really scary, and I didn't have any of the skills that I have now. And so I think often we forget that when people come into a workplace, they don't have those, you know, we're like, well, we want people to, you know, show initiative. Well, what does it actually mean to show initiative? You know, we want people with good communication skills, but what does that mean? If you've not worked before, how do you know what's actually expected of you? And then obviously time and resources for volunteer organisations. And the other one was around how do we address barriers, and literacy and mental health in young people was a huge one that we found. Why is this important? I don't, you know, I think you'll get it. That's why we're here. But just in terms of just some statistics around Playford, youth not engaged in school or work, so between 15 to 24. In Playford, it's double than Greater Adelaide. So these are young people who are not involved in anything at all. And youth unemployment is 23.5% compared to Greater Adelaide of 13%. So we're looking at, you know, a cohort of young people who are very disengaged in comparison to other areas. And so if you look broadly, so Mission Australia have done lots of work, and some of the things they've talked about is, you know, barriers to achieving post-school goals, you know, around academic ability, mental health. So if you're thinking about young people coming in to volunteer and they're dealing, you know, with learning difficulties, with their own mental health, and then financial difficulties. We had young people, you know, even just getting a bus to volunteer, you know, being able to have the right uniform, etc. Okay, sorry, okay, so we brought together, so City of Playford, Salisbury, Tea Tree Gully and Northern Volunteering. We thought, okay, if we're going to do something about this, hear from young people. So we bought, we had a Northern Youth Forum, and we probably, I think we had about maybe 50 or 60 young people, and we had lots of, you know, discussions with them about, I guess, what did they perceive as some of the barriers to participation, you know, what was their thoughts around volunteering. And it was a really positive day. And we were also focusing, okay, so if you could, you know, design volunteering, you know, reimagine it, what would it look like? And they gave us some really good information, which I'll talk about in a second. Really funny, we actually thought, being, you know, young people, we'll make sure that we've got access to, you know, an online Slido where, you know, young people go and pose all their questions. But you know what? Everyone actually wrote things down on a piece of paper, which was really interesting. So we're like, no, young people have to do everything electronically. Well, actually, we were a bit overwhelmed at how many people just wrote it down on these boards we had. So when we asked the questions, do you think young people want to help their local community? Overwhelmingly, yes. You know, people said about feeling good, having a purpose, see people happy, see what they're interested in. And this were young people from 13 to 26. You know, what are the benefits for young people who volunteer? Obviously, you know, not surprising, skill development, confident, preparation for life events, I thought was really interesting. Understanding different lifestyles, personal growth. And then how do you think organisations can better engage young people in volunteering? And that was around tailoring the experiences, support through the process, make it fun, invest, not expect. And I thought that whole invest, not expect, for me was a bit of a aha moment. So, yep, so they're just, because we haven't got much time.
I'm just admitting people, sorry about that. Keep going.
Okay, so yeah, just some of the things that people said, you know, get early experience. Some people want to volunteer, some don't. Etc. So I'm just racing through this. Sorry. Yep. Okay. And then some of the things that they said, unsure about how to become involved, not enough information about roles available, lack of support with application induction. So nothing there that's surprising. Some of the research was talking about finding the right role and making it easy to get involved, trained and supported. Beginning and end of role is clear, but a big thing that I've taken away from this is really around reflection. You ask anyone, and we do it even at our end of staff Christmas party, you know, give us a highlight of this year. You know, what have you learnt? Most people are, oh, can't remember what I've done, can't remember, you know, what I've got out of it. So it was really about trying to get people to understand actually what have you learnt from your involvement. And the other one is around a big focus on culture. And so we're doing some work now about working with other staff within council and other volunteers for them to also reflect and think about their work with young people. So what have we done? We've come up with a bit of a framework, or, you know, a set of kind of strategies, if you want to give it that. The first one is really around focusing on creating the vibe, about investing time in assessing the culture of your organisation from the perspective of a young person. We had some mystery shopper type program that our YAC, Youth Advisory Committee, actually went around and looked at just how welcoming were some of our facilities to young people. And it was really interesting. Some of it was just about even, you know, government signage and whether they could go in. The other one was about swiping right. So making volunteering attractive by involving young people in the promotion, developing roles that provide benefits. I put think Tinder, not marriage. Often I think in a volunteer relationship, we're going for the marriage. We want you to, you know, sign up for life and to, you know, give us your everything. But for some people, it's not that. It's about wanting, especially young people, just wanting to try out something. So I'm conscious I haven't got much time, but I'm happy to talk to people at another time. Making the connection, so about how do we support people, make adjustments to address any barriers. Building the commitment, so invest, not expect, make meaningful connections in the team. Bring the whole team in. Often with volunteering, you know, you've got your volunteer team, but hey, if you've got other staff there, you know, bring them in as well. Bring other volunteers, make it a big warm team. Often you'll find all the research says, even if you're in a job that you don't like, but you're working with awesome people, that can make all the difference about how people stay. On the job, supporting people, and then really around nurturing a sense of purpose. So providing opportunities for everyone to reflect on the benefits. How do you know what you don't know? Build a virtual portfolio. So we're encouraging young people to actually take photos of everything they're doing. You know what? If taking a selfie after you've, you know, delivered a meal to an older person and you're feeling really good about that, why not? Ask the older person, can I, you know, collect this evidence about the stuff that I've done? And connecting the role to the bigger picture. You know what, if you're in, and we all know this is, you know, in the volunteer sector, you know, help people to understand what they're doing and how it connects to a bigger picture, and sharing those positive outcomes. And then, you know what, as people transition out, celebrate their achievement and the part the team played in it. So this year we're going to be running, well, this year, next year, I think we're all hoping this year will be over. We're going to do some work next year embedding this within our organisation and trying it out. Okay, thank you. Sorry, everyone. I've just...
That's all right. Thanks, Roxanne. I know we're on a tight time schedule. So that's a little bit of an insight into the case study that happened in South Australia. What I've got the pleasure now of doing is handing over to Ross, who is going to present the full report, because this was a national piece of research. So Ross Wyatt is the founder and managing director of Think Impact and was the lead researcher on reimagining volunteering for contemporary Australia. Think Impact works to support not-for-profits, industry and government and better manage for social and environmental impact. He's been researching volunteerism since 2012 and has been an active volunteer both here in Australia and overseas. He was formerly the head of the Starlight Children's Foundation, which engaged thousands of volunteers in many roles. He's a founding member of the Social Impact Measurement Network of Australia, SIMNA, and current national board member, a contributor to the Australian Social and Market Research Society, and a senior judge in the Banksia Sustainability Awards. Ross firmly believes that the opportunity to participate must be open to everyone, and social cohesion arises when we all do what we can to eliminate the barriers to participation. So welcome, Ross. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Mel, and thanks to Donatella and Roxanne for that introduction. It's great to be here, and thank you everybody for coming here today and joining in as we launch this important bit of reimagining. It's a bit of a day for reimagining. I noticed that Roxanne's been reimagining youth volunteering, and here we are. And it's a great word, because that's exactly what we need to do. And what this research found is that if we are to actually build social cohesion in a meaningful way, we need to rethink the way that we see volunteering. I'm going to just quickly share a screen for a second. So forgive me while I get that up there. So this is really what this is about, and really I also want to kind of acknowledge Julie Pettit, the energy that Julie put into this at the start, and as in her former role as CEO of the Centre for Participation. And it was really a joint effort between Think Impact, Centre for Participation. The NNVRC played a critical role. That network of rogues, I think that Donatella or Mel referred to, and the Australian Government Department of Social Services. And it was really a question that DSS asked. And DSS, as you probably know, is the largest government department in the country, and they asked a pretty critical question about, well, does the way that we're engaging volunteers at the moment build social cohesion? Can we find that out? And what a journey it's been. It's taken a couple of years really of deep study, including some case studies and some close-up look in various issues. Of course, in Adelaide, we're looking at the issue of engaging young people in volunteering. So here we go. And that's what we had to do. We wanted to reimagine it, and to really, as I say, in a nutshell, we're asking this seemingly fundamental question. Sure, look, volunteering's great. I mean, who doesn't appreciate and love volunteering? And of course, you know, people come together around volunteering, and you know, of course, it creates social cohesion, and certainly on the surface, it does. Volunteering is a critical part, it's an essential part of our national fabric. You see what happens when times are tough, when disasters occur. The way that people pitch in and help is quite profound. But we've also seen, interestingly enough, what happens when we have a national pandemic. And 2020, ironically, will always be known for the number 19, and as COVID-19 devastated 2020. And what happened, of course, was we saw formal volunteering drop 40% in that time. But did people stop looking after each other? Did people stop caring? No, and in fact, what happened, of course, the activity of volunteers that wasn't able to occur because of safety reasons was replaced with some really interesting activities, and we've all experienced them, whether it's young girls that used to drop off a cookie recipe to us all every day for a while, you know, all those kind of activities, the way that we kind of rang in and looked out for each other during the time, especially here in Melbourne and other places that have had lockdowns. So there you go, that was the question that was asked. And of course, I also need to acknowledge these organisations. Apologies for anyone who's not on there who's joined the NNVRC since. These organisations actually are all volunteer resource centres that have come together under the NNVRC, of which Julie now chairs, and really informed the way that we're thinking and are sharing information in new ways to actually better deliver services and to better reimagine how volunteering can exist, how we can use volunteering to build social cohesion. The ones I've highlighted there, by the way, are all really opened themselves up to actually re-examine and challenge some of their current practices. And I'll talk about the way that we challenged those practices and said, well, what would happen if you engage volunteers in a different way? And you'll see what those ways were. Just to give you a quick sort of snapshot of a couple up in Albury-Wodonga, where I was a couple of days ago. The Volunteer Resource Bureau there were running programs for Bhutanese refugees, where they engage and recruit a volunteer to drive a bus to pick these people up, to bring them to a place a couple of times a week, because they've come from a place where they're very socially isolated. They often don't have family around. They've spent a lot of time in refugee camps, many of them, so they've been living 6 inches apart, and all of a sudden they're living, 6 miles apart. And it was a real shock. And But of course, it was really interesting when we sort of said, well, what would happen if you're putting the effort into the volunteer? What happens if we put those resources and the decision making around that activity into the hands of the Bhutanese people themselves? How might that be different? In the Centre for Participation in Horsham, you know, the real focus, the different focus there, focus on, well, what happens when you actually, the VRC focuses on building the governance capacity of smaller community organisations all around, and whether it was the, I get this wrong, Julie, the Wimmera Agricultural Society, or the Horsham Agricultural Society, I keep getting that wrong. St Arnaud Community Resource Centre. There's also the Horsham Table Tennis Club, which is actually, as in their own words, is a disability inclusion organisation pretending to be a table tennis club. You know, it's really looking at different organisations and how they can reimagine the way that they include people and they'll enable people to participate. Up in the northern parts of Melbourne, one of those outer urban areas, a place called Mernda, they got access to this Mernda Community House, and instead of delivering prescribed volunteering activities in there, they threw it open to the community and said, what would happen if we just create this space for you? How can you, how can you imagine ways of using this space to build participation? And out of that's come a whole lot of wonderful, wonderful activities. And of course, the focus in Northern Volunteering here in Adelaide, or there in Adelaide, was the development, and congratulations on the development of a youth framework for the volunteering sector, because it was really, really important that they are one of the groups, and I will never forget an interview I did with a volunteer coordinator in Adelaide. He said, oh, just hate it when young people come through the door because, you know, they've got no skills for us, and, you know, there's nothing, we don't have a role for them. And it sort of really helped us then, well, what happens if, who do you actually exist for? Do you exist for the organisations, for the, you know, to actually transact people into roles, or should we be designing roles around the people? And it was kind of one of those early clues about the difference between volunteering and participation, and that the way that we've shaped our thinking around this idea of volunteering. As someone said to me recently, you don't know, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. So first thing we did was actually look at, well, where is volunteering coming from? Before I go into that, I just wanted to mention the volunteer management activity. I think it was Mel who mentioned that the funding instrument that the federal government uses is called the VMA, the Volunteer Management Activity. It was developed 33 years ago. 33 years ago, that was when the policy was designed. That was when they started to imagine it, when Australia, our population's, you know, more than nearly, or 54% more. Now we have, you know, 1 in every 3 people in Australia are born overseas, 1 in every 5 speaking a language other than English at home. University is very expensive. It's not free anymore. You know, we've got this casualisation of the economy. A lot more women in the workforce. A lot of things have changed structurally, and yet we're still funding and thinking about volunteering in that same way. And it's really interesting when you peel back that next layer and go, well, why? What is volunteering? Why do we look at it with this particular lens? Where has it come from? And it is really interesting when you go back to the mid-19th century, when, you know, it only had military connotations. It wasn't that long ago that it used to be you're either a conscript or you're a volunteer into the army. That's the only way it got used. But that idea of free will and choice still has strong relevance in the way that we use the word nowadays. And we often talk of volunteers, you know, giving time, helping others, and often, you know, giving back. And as again, another great interview we did is this, and someone was describing a situation when, you know, someone says, oh, I love to volunteer because, you know, I want to give back. And the other person says, why? What is it that you've taken? And it was kind of a interesting, again, reflection about, well, who is able to give back? It's only when you get into a position of relative privilege that you're able to have that scope to give back. And it was great looking at some research done by Volunteer Australia just recently, and they looked at look, volunteers have a, you know, high level of education, high level of income, tend to be white, tend to be more privileged, and tend to have high levels of life satisfaction. And you start to wonder, what's causing what? You know, is it because you've got into that position that you're able to be a volunteer, or is it the volunteering that's causing that? And quite clearly, it's the causal relationship is one that, you know, it's people that are in a position to help others and give back, and that's the framing by which they do it, which is not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful aspect of our society that when people are in that position, they do give back, and that's quite important. So in Australia, of course, volunteering, you know, does come from the early religious customs of our role as a penal colony and the British legacy there. And we can't forget that this is where it came from, that we had largely white Christian middle-aged people who are, you know, enacting their religious organisations were very supportive of helping those in need. And that's kind of where it all began. But of course, it's very different now, but that's where it began. And there's our Salvation Army ladies, and you'll still see that echo in the way that we look at and manage and who volunteers in Australia today. Volunteering is an evolving concept, and Volunteering Australia has worked to evolve that. Back in 1996, the definition used to, you know, volunteering had to take place in a non-profit organisation for projects, the benefit of the community, obviously done with free will and no coercion and no payment, and designated volunteer positions only. And that's, of course, what's now been framed as formal volunteering, what we all know as formal volunteering, where the role drives the activity. So we look for people to fill a role. So again, that transaction of who's got the skills to put into that role. Of course, back in 2015, you know, the idea of informal volunteering became much more well recognised, and the definition became time willingly given for the common good and without financial gain. So it didn't have to take place in an organisation to be considered volunteering. So they're the activities that volunteering resource centres are funded to support this idea of time willingly given. And it's a good thing. Of course, volunteering is a good thing. You know, it has such positive impacts on people and communities, people who experience profound value, sometimes it's by being a volunteer or one who's being volunteered to. And that's a really important dynamic. And I remember one volunteer telling me it's the most selfish thing they do because they get so much out of volunteering. And it's true, you do. It's a very enriching practice. But there is a flip side, and a sort of a misunderstood dark side of volunteering. It's sometimes, you know, we're being much more conscious now of power and power dynamics. We're looking at, you know, when we look at Black Lives Matter and we look at the way that we're starting to reimagine social dynamics and inclusion, especially in multicultural societies. And, you know, when you do have a volunteer who's volunteering to someone, sometimes that can actually embed that power dynamic, that the person who is being volunteered to doesn't actually get too much of a say in the activity because they've got someone who's supporting them. And when we look at the Bhutanese refugees before, that was a good example of that realisation that came through that particular project when we go, oh, we're actually supporting the volunteer because to drive the bus and, you know, to do the things, and we recognise the volunteer, but what are we doing to recognise the community members that are being supported, that are actually the ones that we're trying to transform their lives. So it became a very interesting early finding about, you know, the transactional nature of the way that we manage volunteering. We identify, we recruit, we train, we place volunteers into organisations and into roles and activities. Yet when someone, as Donatella pointed out, as Roxanne pointed out, when someone walks in the door and you know, they have those barriers, they don't have the skills, they're young, but they want to get involved in something, we don't have a role for them. So this is where we need to sort of start to actually change, well, how do we evolve VRC so that they can actually respond to that and help transform communities and make that participation available to everybody, including those who perhaps don't have English as their first language or don't have any language, who perhaps have low levels of education, who perhaps have mental health and disability and have disabilities. And these are the things that we're starting to look at. It goes, how do you create social cohesion? Because you've got to remember, that was the key question that was asked here. Is not, is volunteering good? It was, does volunteering lead to social cohesion? I love this idea, and I've often said that volunteering's been around in Australia as long as footprints have marked the earth, and while this is the Cultural and Indigenous Research Centre of Australia, circa, plays it this way: while not labelled as volunteering, and it's really important, that labelling, supporting family and community is interwoven with kinship responsibilities and is a fundamental part of self-fulfilment, in stark contrast to an individualised Western understanding of helping. It's a real kind of challenge to us, and we go, wow, how could helping be anything other than great? But it's really interesting, that this idea of giving back and helping, it kind of compartmentalises it rather than making it a fundamental part of self-fulfilment as it exists in Aboriginal communities. As I said earlier, Australia is now proudly a place of many cultures. We know that, we see it in our areas. I remember I was filming a documentary up in Playford at a football club up there, and it was wonderful to watch the footy club come off the field after training, and I was actually interviewing some of the people up in the club, and when the footy players came off, the local Afghani community came in and they sat down in circles, and the kids started playing soccer, and some of the senior members of the club were kind of quite derogatory about, these people taking over. And we sort of started exploring the idea, well, what about if you became a football and soccer club? Your population around here is changing. You embrace it. And that's, I believe, what's happening now. Interestingly, a person I know, Teju Cole, writes some really interesting work about the white saviour industrial complex, and in her introduction, Mel mentioned that I've been spending time myself volunteering in Tanzania, working in an orphanage, and doing exactly this, and when I look back at this now, I start to think, what is my motivation for going to Tanzania and working in an orphanage? And am I part of the white saviour industrial complex, where it's not just about justice, because I probably didn't do anything to change justice in a real way other than for the time I was there? Is it more about having a big emotional experience that validates my privilege? And that was a really challenging idea, and it really challenged me to think about, well, what is it, the way that the kind of activities that we engage in, and are we focusing our support in the right way? So something to think about. That brings us to this second idea around social cohesion. This was the other part of the equation that we're asked about. Well, is it leading to social cohesion? So to understand that, we've got to understand, what do we mean by social cohesion? The first thing I can tell you about it is that it is in slow and steady decline in Australia, especially this idea of exception and rejection, legitimacy, which is kind of the way that we view people who live differently to ourselves. As we all know, that political rhetoric can break down social cohesion far more easily than we can build it up. Losing trust is far easier than gaining it. So that's a quick picture of social cohesion. So what we mean it gets mixed up a lot with social inclusion. Now, social inclusion is the state of being for an individual. Are you included? Do you belong? Are you connected well to other people? But social cohesion, on the other hand, is a characteristic of a whole community. So when we look at social cohesion, we go, well, how are we supporting, how are we creating the glue that holds a whole community together? And it's different. So telling a story about an individual who's now much more included because they volunteer may not in fact be contributing to social cohesion on a grand scale, even though it may be building social inclusion. So we looked around the world and drew on the best research. It's, social cohesion is now considered a really valid and important social policy goal. And we've ended up with this model. And it's a really useful one to actually go, well, if we're going to build social cohesion, this is what we've got to be building. So when we go through, have a look at this, I want you to think about volunteering and the degree to which we've got potential to build more of this kind of stuff. Now, just starting at the top left there, you know, do people have access to places and infrastructure where they can be mutually supportive? And I know you can tell me, yes, we've got some places. We've got Mernda House over here, and we've got this, and you've got a community house here, and you've got your facility and centre for participation. But do we have enough? Do people have access? Is access to that fairly distributed? And do people really feel connected to those and safe in those places? And it's really different when we look at Mernda, and the local government spent a fair bit on a community centre and a pool and a squash courts and gym, and it's a paid place. But when we go to, you know, Mernda House, and people go, but we don't feel like we belong over in that community centre. We belong here. This is our place. And that sense of being strongly connected is really, really important. So think about social participation and the access people have to that. Again, there's the relationships they have and around them. We often talk about natural supports. Do people have people around them that can help? You know, we've seen this come to life in spades during COVID-19, where people have actually who don't have social supports, don't have strong friends and family around them to help out, have really been isolated and have unfairly suffered the impact of COVID-19. As is other aspects of that is trust in others, and as I say, acceptance of diversity. And as we become a more and more diverse society, accepting individuals with different values and lifestyles to us as equals, not as aren't they gorgeous because of their cute costumes, but as equals is really, really important. And of course, the focus on the common good. You know, and we've seen this again played out during the past year, when people feeling responsibility for others and are willing to help, and even mask wearing and, you know, staying at home in lockdown and observing social distances, like Roxanne and Donatella aren't there, I can see. That willingness to feeling responsibility for others is a part of social cohesion, as is civic participation. People being able to participate in social discussions and abiding by the fundamental rules of society is part of it as well. So when we think about social cohesion, we're talking about something much bigger than just social inclusion, and we're talking about something much bigger than well done, than just volunteering. So ask yourself, where's the potential for volunteering to evolve in a way that contributes to those 9 dimensions of social cohesion? And thanks to the work of the NMVRC and the case studies we looked at, and the experts who provided their advice to this research, we were able to come up with a way of reimagining volunteering as participation. And it looks more like this. You know, we want to be, and of course you see on the right there that formal and informal volunteering is still a critical part of it. You know, people joining Red Cross or Landcare, or, you know, acting as treasurer of their local sporting club or whatever, they are important roles. As is people caring for your friend's child, or participating in a street cleanup activity, or attending a community garden, and all those informal volunteering things. But the thing that we pay less regard for is the support for helping people get involved. Anybody and everybody to get involved, not just those who can. So, you know, and you know, the tennis club in Horsham, table tennis club in Horsham, was a classic example of, you know, it's a table tennis club, but, you know, it's also so much about people of all abilities participating in that, and people learning about disability and about acceptance and inclusion. And, you know, it was a real interest in how you support people to just get involved in something, whether it's an activity, whether it's playing music. I remember in Adelaide, talking to young people, you know, the focus was on, well, how do we get them volunteering? When you talk to young people, often they go, well, we don't want to volunteer. We want a place where we can come together and play music, or play whatever it is, or do whatever it is that we want to do. And You know, I do love that idea about disengaged young people. And, you know, I often think that they're not really disengaged. They're just not engaged with the things that we think they should be engaged. Young people are very, very engaged. They're disengaged with things that if we don't give them opportunities to engage in positive things, they'll engage in negative things. I did some work with some heroin addicts not that long ago, and they said to me, "This is just my family. That's how I got a family. I couldn't find my spot anywhere." And then all of a sudden I come together with these people and we shoot up and we're like family. And you realise, wow, it's actually filling a fundamental place. And of course, the other thing that we've seen come up in the last year is just these random acts of kindness, you know, doing the stuff that's, you know, helping a stranger in need, or, you know, bringing in neighbours' rubbish bin, or providing career guidance to a friend, or just all of those kind of acting in the common good kind of things. Now, together in the middle there is a really important role, and that's what we call social innovation capacity. And social innovation is a really interesting idea too. This is the development of enterprises and opportunities that actually fulfill social roles. You've all heard about social enterprises. You've probably been involved with a kitchen in the hood, or a coffee shop on a, you know, people, or a multicultural kitchen that's, you know, providing food opportunities and ways for people to get involved. But another important part that we're seeing in other parts of the world is a thing called social prescribing. Social prescribing is, you know, recognised, especially in the UK and in some other places, where they go, when people are presenting at doctors with, you know, depression, anxiety and other mental health challenges, there's a couple of ways that you can address that. And one of them, of course, is the pharmaceutical route. But the other thing is actually treating some of the cause of those things. And often it is related to isolation and exclusion. And so what they're doing is doctors are actually prescribing social contact and social participation to people as a way of actually treating mental health issues. So we need a place and an infrastructure that doctors can prescribe to, so that when people are prescribed participation activities as a medical treatment, there's somewhere where they can go. And that raises the question and takes us to our recommendations in this report. And the first recommendation is actually around VRCs, and you're participating in one, and Mel and Donatella represent two of them, where, you know, we need to be broadening the remit of those volunteer resource centres to better build all dimensions of social cohesion, not just focus on volunteering. And to do that, we need to actually shift that emphasis from the basic thing, from volunteering to participation. Now, that doesn't mean we turn our back on volunteering. Volunteering is included within participation. It's one of the dimensions. And secondly, we've already got this infrastructure of, you know, upwards of nearly 100 volunteer resource centres around the country, and they're in the best position to foster the development of this infrastructure, social participation building infrastructure to support social cohesion. So we started defining those organisations around their impact of building social cohesion, then all of a sudden their activities can be much more broader and much more in support of where we need to be as a nation, really. The second set of recommendations is around, well, how do we get there? Building a strategic framework to support that sector's transition. And that looks like a national participation strategy. So really taking participation seriously. And second is within that, there's a local aspect to all of those things. So making sure there's local regional participation plans that fit within the national strategy. As I say, evolve the VRCs, and we just have a working title of regional participation resource centres. You can call them what you like, but but the point is that their focus is on building opportunities for people, anybody and everybody, to participate, and really reduce those barriers to participation. So obviously more research and evaluation required associated with those things. And the third area that we recommend to government, as I say, they spend $18 million every 3 years supporting the VRCs through the volunteer management activity. yet they're happily talking about spending $500 million on developing a war museum. And when you go, well, what's kind of valuable? How valuable is social participation in Australia? How much is it worth? Our position on that is that it's worth a hell of a lot more than is currently being spent on it. So we're suggesting a real focus of 3 or 5 year transition funding to support sector transition and actually help them, lift their back foot up. If you're walking, you've got to leave something behind. So you've got to lift your back foot up. So forgetting some of the activities of the past and reimagining ourselves as participation organisations. And we also think that because it is an essential part of social policy, there should be also a long-term certainty in a commitment to core funding. I will finish at that point. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ross. Like I said, I hope everyone's sort of suitably impressed by what's come out of this research. I think, like I said before, I think it's really, really challenging, really makes us think about our roles as volunteer resource centres, but also for volunteer involving organisations, just around how you involve people in your activities. So we will make sure everyone gets a copy of the research. What I want to do just in closing is to hand over to Julie Patet, who is the current chair of the National Network of Volunteer Resource Centres. And she's just going to talk about what this actually means for the future and how you can be involved in helping us realise this. Julie was the CEO for the Centre of Participation in Horsham, which was formerly known as Volunteer in Western Victoria. And she's currently General Manager of Welcoming Intercultural Neighbours in Queensland. So I'll hand over to you, Julie. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mel. And thank you, Ross, for giving that presentation. I really admire you and the fact that you can take such a long piece of work. For those of you who don't know, it's been sort of about 2.5 years, and the many, many learnings through there and synthesize it down to, a presentation. So I appreciate it, and I genuinely hope it gave people a bit of a taste to want to learn more and read more from the research. I also like to just acknowledge the work that Donatella and Mel and Roxanne have all done to contribute to this. And I'd like to also acknowledge Evelyn O'Loughlin from Volunteering SANT, who's here today, and also Crystal Mex. I've had the pleasure to work with both these ladies before, and I'm really impressed at their commitment as well. So I think, congratulations to everybody who's here today. So I'm the chair of the NNVRC. We're, as Mel said in the beginning, we're the National Network of Volunteer Resource Centres. 2016, there was a group of us who came together so the government was reviewing for the umpteenth time in my life our volunteer resource centres, why they would fund them, peaks, VA, why would they fund everybody, what would they do? And we came together to say, actually, we've got questions of our own, and we had them of each other. And that is, who are we as organisations? What are we here to do? What are we trying to achieve? How do we know when we've made an impact? And what's actually really important to us? All of that was underpinned by the knowledge that actually volunteering was changing. We're in a different world now than we were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Life is different. I spent some time working for the National Tertiary Education Union, and we know that the industrial framework that we all live under at the moment is very different than it used to be. So people need to engage in their communities in a different way. We also know that there are different aspirations for people now. There was a time when people would aspire to taking a Meals on Wheels position or a solid volunteering role, and it was part of their almost retirement, I suppose, and as Ross referred to, their giving back. But we know now that people really look at their time in the same way we look at our money. And that is, we go, we have a limited amount of it, and we want to get the best bang for our buck, or the best bang for our time. So no longer do they want to know which is just the best organisation to go to. What people want to know is actually, what difference will I make if I spend my time doing something? How can I change the world? How can my community become a different place? Because what they want to do more and more is they want to create the life that they want to live. So it really is, as Ross said, volunteering in traditional roles are still there. They will always be there. And as the daughter of an 80-year-old who has some dementia now and is starting to need some services, damn right, I want to know that there are formalised volunteers that have had police checks, that have done training, and they are there to help. However, I also have come to know an increasing number of people, young people, new migrants, new residents from communities, working people who say, actually, I want to participate in my community. I want to get involved. I want to create the community that I want to live in. And they don't necessarily resonate with formalised volunteering. So this was something the NNVRC really started to say, you know, we've got an on-ground role here. We are organisations that can make a difference. So we've walked the halls of Parliament in Canberra, myself and my colleagues, to actually talk with MPs. We've done it at a state level as well, to really raise our concerns about the fact there's not enough to look at social inclusion and cohesion. So out of this came the opportunity to do the research.
As what, sorry?
I don't know whether that was for me or someone else. Anyway, so from here, where do we go to now the research is done? Well, we are going to be advocating quite strongly. We'd really invite all of you to be part of the conversation with us, to work with us, to have these conversations. I had the good fortune back in 2011, before I got involved in the volunteer sector. I was in the conservation sector actually, and I got involved in the national volunteering strategy that was developed in 2011. And there hasn't been another one developed since at a national level, and it really focused very much on, this is my worldview, on two things. One is formalised volunteering, and the other one was really trying to use technology for a quick fix to reduce the costs, to say that we've done it. Now, I'm not sure if there's been any evaluation done of that strategy, but I would suggest that it probably hasn't achieved anything like that originally hoped it would. We believe that it's time for a new strategy, and for the government to fund or not fund, or change funding, or do something different without an actual national participation strategy, we think is not a smart move. If there was a national participation strategy, then that actually allows the states to contribute to that, along with other stakeholders. It means then that you've got the state peaks that are able to give effect to working actively in a state strategy that's linked to a national strategy. It also means that volunteer resource centres, or as we think they should be called, participation centres, regional participation centres, can actually then take a lead in the development of regional participation plans. And we're not trying to say that we're there to do everything. That's not it at all. What we're saying is that we have a key focus on identifying who are all the players and what does the landscape look like in our regional areas. How do we work together? How do we have our relationships with our state peaks and Volunteering Australia, but how do we also work with the COSs and all of the other organisations that actually have an interest? And where do Trees for Life do? You're here, you do some amazing work with volunteers, and it's fantastic the way you do it, and volunteer farmers. So how does what you do get recognised as part of regional participation plans? Where is there then gaps identified and more work done? And if we shifted the role of volunteer resource centres to really be focusing on participation, then we are talking about strengthening community organisations. And we're talking about small community organisations that are not just volunteer involving, they are all volunteers or members, and they are working together. And these are the ones that we need to be supporting them to enable them to support the community. So I would really encourage you to read the research, to speak with Mel and Donatella, to be part of the conversation, and please do reach out, and let's really make this a bit of a national movement. So thank you very much, everybody, and I will enjoy hearing what comes from this in South Australia.
Thank you, Julie. That was fantastic. I'm aware we have gone over time a little bit, but like Julie said, any questions or comments or anything you want to chat to Donatella or I about the research, certainly get in touch. I don't know if anyone's got any pressing questions that they want to ask now, or any comments. I know Donatella's been keeping an eye on the chat, which is fantastic. But did anyone want the opportunity to ask anything now, or ask anything of Ross while he's here? No? Okay.
Yep, Crystal's got a question there.
Oh, sorry, Crystal, go for it.
Yes, I really enjoyed your research, Ross. I was wondering if you found anything about leaders of small community groups, if you found any research that affected them, or would it be of interest to them? These are people that are finding it very stressful to navigate, red tape and more complex organizations when they don't have any paid staff to help them.
Yeah, quite a bit actually, and it was interesting. Actually, one of my favourite quotes was from a small regional organisation who said, and she said, the problem is that young people don't want to get involved, and when they do, they want to take over. And it was an interesting question about that. So yeah, what we have found, it was one of the focuses in Horsham, of course, is that the governance capacity of those sort of organisations to actually transition in response to the changes in their community was a real struggle. They've come from this traditional lens of volunteering. Their community has changed. A lot of people have come into regional towns, especially looking for lower housing costs and other things. And it was quite easy for some communities to dismiss parts of the community and say, oh, look, in our community we've got givers and takers, and the giving roles were kind of conserved, and the new people to the town couldn't find opportunities to participate even if they wanted to. So we just think there's a real role for those community organisations to and to build the capacity then to transition into ones that are much more welcoming of new change, and start to actually look at what the people need and find activities for people, rather than look at the roles, the volunteering roles, and then try and recruit people into those roles. And just that simple change, we think will change quite a bit. Same thing with young people, in areas where there's high levels of youth unemployment. It's not about, we need to rethink them so that it's actually, we design the roles for the people, not the people for the roles,
And it's about giving those small organisations the opportunity to actually understand and to learn how to engage people. I currently manage an organisation that's largely here to support new migrants in central Queensland. Now, I can't even begin to tell you the number of people that walk through our doors who have been in Australia for 6 months, 6 years, and anywhere in between, who are still struggling to try and get engaged because they don't know how to approach community organisations, and community organisations don't know how to work with them. And it's not necessarily about teaching the community organisations about formalised volunteering positions. It's about teaching them about governance. It's about teaching them about, strategically, if you want to be relevant in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, well, there are all these people in the community who want to participate. So it's actually best for you to learn and understand, how do you work with people who are Muslim? How do you how do you engage with people whose English isn't a first language? And, you know, they'll come out with some really interesting terminology at times. But how do you work with them for that? And why do we get so hung up that emails need to be spelt and set out perfectly, or we won't let anybody near the email service? You know, so there's just so much more that we could do to support those small community organisations actually be more responsive. And, you know, as many of us know, these are the same groups that are struggling for membership because they've got membership categories set in some sort of archaic model to say, you know, you can apply to be a member and it's going to take you 6 weeks before you're told you can get it. And then you've got to do X, Y, and Z exactly on the day that you're told to, or you can't be a member. So
yeah.
How do we change all of that?
Yeah, I've got a funny story. I did some focus groups about this, and one young girl in her early 20s joined a crocheting group, and they asked her to come on the committee, and they wouldn't let her speak until other business. They were, you know, moving formal motions and seconding, and she ran out. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And this is what we've seen is the compliance burden that's come into our formal volunteering frame is really starting. And we do want to manage risk, but you know, working with children's check is not a substitute, or a police check is not a substitute for a risk management strategy. And unfortunately, we've applied these compliance overlays that are now perhaps acting as a barrier to people participating in informal ways. As one person said, I hope my people don't become volunteers, because then I'll be liable if they hurt their finger or something, you know. So it's allowing for that people to actually come together to help each other in informal ways is super important. We shouldn't.
And when you find groups of people who are being marginalised, how do we identify ways for those group of people to participate? And that is absolutely the important part. You know, we've just finished yesterday. We established a few months ago after I arrived, we had a group of people who there just weren't roles for them, and we were struggling to find them. And we found out that many of them enjoyed sewing. So we established a sewing circle where all we did was provide a venue. People started donating sewing machines. We got things together. Our organisation now, out the front, they went on a bit of a project together to make buntings. We have buntings for Cancer Week. We have buntings for Movember. We have buntings for Christmas. We get out and we change them now every month. You know, we have people come in, they feel so proud because they say, oh, I made that triangle and I did that, and they really feel like they're making a difference. We've now had people who work for Uniting just up the road calling in and saying to us, wow, you know, I love coming to work, walking past your organisation in the morning. It makes me feel so good when I see all those flags and buntings flying there. So, you know, it's about that participation.
I think Nat Cook, Shadow Minister for Human Services, did you have a question?
I was actually going to ask a little bit about the capacity for organisations to adapt flexibly to the needs of young people and other diverse groups. So it started to get covered off there anyway. Covering both youth and volunteers within the human services portfolio provides an interesting avenue for me to pursue some of this policy work as a next step. So I'd be interested to see when you do send out the summary, and if I can recommend, you know, if you do want to send to other members of parliament or lobby governments, you know, to make it nice and succinct, you know, and really just be direct about what's required. So that's essentially where I was going to go, and that sort of got covered off on anyway. But really good work, and it's great to see some research happening in this area, because it's really important to grow that volunteering space given the ageing population, not just generally but of volunteers. So, and I don't think we always have to make young people change to fit the older volunteering cohort. We have to make it a little bit of a two-way street. Yeah, so yeah. Thanks for it. Yeah, it's good.
Thanks for that, Nat. And I think South Australia is kind of leading the way nationally a little bit in that, with the work that is coming out with the volunteering strategy around engaging young people. But certainly we'll be in touch, and yeah, but we are going to share the research far and wide. as much as we can, and share the recording of today as well, so people can hear particularly what Ross had to say about it. Did anyone else have any questions or comments? Because I am very conscious of time.
Oh, sorry. I guess I just had one question for Ross. I guess when we talked about participation and a lot of the, I guess some of the examples that were given in terms of the case studies, kind of does remind me of the role of community centres. And I guess, how do you see volunteer resource centres? How would their role be different to a community centre, or are you seeing that it's kind of similar?
Can I jump in and answer that? And I'm sorry, Ross, I'll be succinct. I think, and I thought a lot about this, Roxanne, and that's why I wanted to say something. Community centres primarily are about supporting individuals, and that's really, really important. And I think what we're saying does come out of this research is volunteer resource centres or participation centres are really about those small community organisations, and they're about trends and they're about groups. Now, there's always going to be a place for volunteer resource centres to do individual referrals, because we have got groups of marginalised people who need one-on-one help in that volunteering space, and that's not going to go away. But I think this research is saying that helping small community organisations, and when I think of that, I think of the small group that are largely unstaffed, you know, up to 250,000 a year turnover, and the groups that are really going to try and then participate and grow participation in their community.
And if I just quickly add to that, I mean, one of the roles we see, community centres, neighbourhood houses, local parks and gardens, they're all examples of places where what we call hyperlocal community or participation infrastructure, places where people can participate together. The role of the VRC, or the Participation Resource Centre, is to actually help coordinate and support those things together, so that you've actually got a real conscious, planned piece of infrastructure that is across your community that is all about participation. And that's kind of the key to that piece, rather than just looking at each piece on its own. So think about parks and gardens, think about roads, think about water distribution, think about electricity distribution. Distribution of participation infrastructure should be kind of thought of in the same way. It is essential infrastructure for towns, regions, populations, communities, and cities.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Julie. Anybody else wanted to add anything before we close this off?
I look forward to reading the report. Thanks.
Yep, we'll get that out to everyone this afternoon, and thank you all for coming along and joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation about this.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks for your support.
Thanks, everyone.
Well done.